Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today we're diving into a shocking 1-minute betrayal. Ngok turns on Lin and secretly hands Yuri the proof that the DNA report was faked, just as an emergency board vote threatens to steal the company. Will this single crack destroy Lin's entire plan, or will she strike back even harder? If you enjoy the story, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss the next episode. The hospital corridor felt like two wars happening in the same breath. On one side, Mrs. Lan sat under a thin blanket, her hands shaking as a lab technician quietly confirmed what Yuri already knew in his bones. That stamp didn't match. That report didn't belong to this system. On the other side, a speaker announcement echoed down the hall like a countdown. An emergency board vote had already started. Lin's genius wasn't the lie, it was the timing. She had split the truth into 2 clocks and dared Yuri to choose which one mattered more. Yuri didn't yell. He didn't argue with security. He didn't even glare at Lin, because Lin fed on reactions. He simply stepped close to Mrs. Lan, lowered his voice so only she could hear, and said, "Mum, you don't have to decide everything today, just tell me one thing." Mrs. Lan's eyes were wet, terrified and tired. "What? Do you want a clean test?" Yuri said gently. "Or do you want to keep living inside fear?" Lin squeezed Mrs. Lan's hand hard, smiling at the nurse like a victim. "Mom, don't listen. They're pressuring you." Security took a step forward again. "Sir, you need to step away." Yuri lifted a palm, calm, not aggressive, and backed half a step, just enough to show he wasn't fighting the guards, but his eyes stayed on Mrs. Lan. "Tomorrow morning," he said, soft but firm. "A certified independent kit. Witnessed, sealed, no tricks. If you want it, nod once." Mrs. Lan's breath shook. Then, barely, she nodded. It was small, but it was enough. Yuri's chest tightened with relief, and he didn't waste the moment. He turned to the technician. "Please document your statement," he said, "in writing, that the stamp format doesn't match your system." Lin's smile cracked for the first time. "You can't do that," she snapped. The technician blinked. "I can document what I observed." Lin opened her mouth again, and Yuri's phone buzzed, vibrating like a second heartbeat. A message from Twong, short and brutal. "They're voting now. Lin is pushing it through." Yuri closed his eyes for 1 second. Then he did the only thing Lin didn't expect. He didn't run, he delegated. He stepped back, glanced at Tu Tieu and said, "Stay with your mum. Don't let Lin isolate her again." Tu Tieu's eyes widened. "What are you—" Yuri pressed his phone into Twong's hand. "Go to the company. Use my lawyer's number. Delay the vote with procedure. Anything. Don't let them close it clean." Twong didn't hesitate. He nodded once and sprinted. Lin watched him go, then turned back to Yuri with a smile that tried to look innocent. "So you chose the mother, not the company," she said sweetly. "How noble." Yuri didn't answer, because he hadn't chosen anything. He was building proof, quietly, so Lin couldn't rewrite reality later. And Lin, for the first time, looked uneasy. Across town, the company's conference room was bright, polished, and full of controlled panic. People sat with pens in hand like they were about to sign away a future and pretend it was normal. The founder stood at the head of the table, jaw tight. The majority shareholder sat beside him, sweating through a suit that suddenly felt too expensive for the fear in the room. And Lin? Lin moved like she owned the air. "Let's keep this efficient," she said, voice smooth. "We're simply confirming the temporary restructuring. It's routine. Nothing dramatic." Ngok sat near the far end, quiet. He hadn't spoken much since the day of the share transfer. He told himself it was survival. He told himself it wasn't his mess. But today, as Lin smiled and pushed papers across the table, Ngok felt something twist inside him. It wasn't morality. It was disgust. Because he'd seen how Lin treated people once she had leverage, and he kept thinking of Mrs. Lan, shaking, confused, clinging to the nearest hand. Lin's hand. Ngok's stomach turned. The founder cleared his throat. "We have quorum," he said. "We can proceed." Lin nodded. "Great, then we vote." Ngok glanced down at the documents in front of him and noticed something that made his skin go cold. A folder labelled Health Authorization Guardianship Draft. Not a company document, a personal one. He looked up sharply. Lin caught his expression and gave him a tiny look that said, "Don't ask questions here." Ngok's mouth went dry. So it wasn't just shares, it was control of Mrs. Lan too. That's when Ngok's phone vibrated, hidden under the table. Unknown number. One line. "Your DNA stamp is fake. Hospital has no record." Ngok stared at the message like it was a slap. Yuri. Only Yuri would be that direct. Ngok's hands trembled. He remembered the folded DNA report Lin used like a knife. He remembered how fast Mrs. Lan's face changed when Lin cried. He suddenly saw the whole pattern. Company, house, mother, daughter. Lin didn't win with power, she won with paper. Ngok swallowed hard and did something he hadn't done in years. He listened to his conscience, because it was screaming now. Lin called for votes. All in favour? Hands rose, one by one. Ngok didn't raise his hand. Lin's eyes cut toward him, razor sharp. Ngok forced a smile and lifted his hand slowly, just enough to not draw attention. Then he looked down, pretending to check his notes, but his fingers were already moving. He slid his chair back slightly like he needed the restroom. He leaned toward the founder, whispered, "I need to grab the original share transfer file. There's a missing stamp page." The founder frowned. "Now?" Ngok's voice stayed calm. "If we vote and a page is missing, it's invalid." The founder hesitated, then nodded, annoyed. "Fine, be quick." Ngok stood up. Lin's gaze followed him like a camera. He walked out of the room, steady, not running, because running would get him caught. In the hallway, his pace changed. Faster. He cut into the archive room, heart hammering. He found the folder marked Shareholding Update, Originals. His fingers shook as he opened it. There it was. The true signatures, the real stamp sequence, the paper trail, and tucked behind it, like Lin had hidden it in the same place on purpose, was a thin envelope. Inside, a receipt and a contact card from a private lab, not the hospital. Ngok's blood turned to ice, so Lin didn't even use a proper hospital process. She bought a result. Ngok snapped photos with shaking hands, then, without thinking too hard, he did the most dangerous thing. He grabbed the envelope. He shoved it into his jacket, because photos could be denied. But physical evidence? Physical evidence could destroy her. His phone buzzed again, this time a new message from Yuri. "If you know something, meet me. Parking level B, 3 minutes. Ngok stared at the screen. 3 minutes. That was his entire life changing in 1 minute. He could go back to the room, pretend loyalty, keep his job, keep breathing, or he could step into the fire and betray Lin. Ngok exhaled, whispered to himself, "I'm done," and he walked toward the stairs. Parking level B smelled like concrete and exhaust. Yuri stood near a pillar, face unreadable, eyes scanning every shadow. When Ngok appeared, Yuri didn't look surprised. He looked like he'd been expecting this. Ngok stopped 3 feet away, hands raised slightly like he didn't want Yuri to think this was a trick. "I don't have much time," Ngok said, voice shaking. She's worse than I thought." Yuri's eyes didn't soften. "What do you have?" Ngok pulled out the envelope. Lab receipt, contact card, not hospital. The DNA paper is fake. Yuri's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. Ngok added quickly, "And the originals. Share transfer trail. I took photos." Yuri reached out and took the envelope like it weighed 100 kilos. "Why are you doing this?" Ngok swallowed hard. "Because I watched her use a mother like a shield," he said. "And because if I stay quiet now, I'm not a person anymore." Yuri nodded once, small, controlled. You just made an enemy for life. Ngok's lips trembled. I know. Then Ngok's phone lit up. One word from Lin. Where? Ngok went pale. Yuri grabbed his wrist, low voice. Go back. Act normal. Don't let her know you met me. Ngok nodded too fast. If I don't return, she'll... A door slammed somewhere behind them. Footsteps. Fast. Yuri's eyes snapped up. Two men in black suits stepped into the parking level scanning. Not security, not staff. People who looked like they didn't ask questions. Ngok's breath hitched. She sent them. Yuri's voice dropped to ice. Go, now. Gosh turned, and one of the men called his name, calm and deadly. Ngok. Ngok froze like his spine had been unplugged. Yuri stepped forward, blocking the line of sight. Wrong person, Yuri said flatly. The man smiled. No, right person. Ngok's heart pounded so hard it hurt. Yuri leaned close to Ngok and whispered, Whatever happens, don't admit anything. I already have enough. Ngok's eyes filled with panic. Yuri! The men moved closer. Ngok took one step back, and then a hand grabbed his shoulder from behind. Hard. Ngok flinched and the envelope was already gone, safe in Yuri's grip. Ngok's last look at Yuri wasn't heroic. It was terrified. But there was also something else. Relief. Because for the first time, Lin didn't own the whole story anymore, and Yuri, holding the lab receipt in his hand, understood the truth. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was the first crack in Lin's entire empire. And somewhere above them, in a bright conference room, a vote was still happening. Unaware that Ngok had just lit the fuse, Nosh didn't resist when the hand clamped his shoulder. Two men in black suits guided him toward the stairs like polite bodyguards, except their grip said this wasn't a choice. Ms. Lin wants a word, one of them smiled. Ngok forced air into his lungs. I was retrieving originals, he said, keeping his voice light. The meeting needs clean paperwork. Of course, the man replied. Then you'll explain why you vanished. Behind a concrete pillar, Yuri stayed still until the footsteps faded. Only then did he open the envelope again under the parking lights. Private lab receipt, contact card, a date. And that date punched him harder than the threat texts, because it didn't match any hospital schedule. This wasn't a mistake, it was manufactured. Yuri snapped a final photo and sent everything to his lawyer and to Tuong with one line. Use this to freeze the vote. Then he texted Tu Tieu. I have proof. Stay steady. He didn't run upstairs. He didn't chase Lin. He walked out of the building like nothing happened, because panic was Lin's favourite weapon. Up in the conference room, Lin's smile was still on, but her eyes were counting seconds. Where is Ngok? She asked. The founder checked his watch. The new majority shareholder tapped a pen, impatient. We should vote. We vote when everyone is seated, Lin said, calm and final. The door opened. Ngok stepped in, pale, jacket slightly crooked, acting like a man who'd simply been stressed by paperwork. Lin's gaze locked on him. You disappeared. Gotch gave a shaky laugh. I caught a missing stamp page in the originals. If we vote with errors, it's challengeable. The founder frowned. Fixed? Ngok nodded. Yes, misfiled. Lin leaned in, voice low and sharp. Next time you leave a room I control, you tell me. Ngok swallowed. Understood. Then Lin straightened, smooth again. All right, we proceed. The doors swung open a second time. Tuong walked in with a corporate lawyer. The lawyer's calm face made the room instantly nervous. Lin's smile tightened. Who authorized this? Tuong ignored her and looked at the founder. We file an official objection to this emergency vote, he said. Verify proxies, quorum and chain of title before any binding motion. The lawyer placed a folder on the table. Written notice, he said evenly. Proceeding without verification increases litigation risk. The majority shareholder scoffed. This is stalling. It's compliance, the lawyer replied, and we have material concerns. Lin's eyes narrowed. What concerns? Tuong's voice cooled. A DNA report used to pressure a key person is not from the claimed hospital system. No order code, no billing trail, stamp format mismatch. We also have a private lab receipt." The room went dead quiet. Ngok kept his eyes on the table, heart punching his ribs. The founder snapped, "This is a corporate meeting." "And coercion impacts governance," the lawyer said. "If personal manipulation influences signatures or control, everything here becomes vulnerable." Lin laughed once. "Too sharp. So you're bringing family drama to stop a vote?" Tuong leaned forward. "Then keep it corporate. Present original proxies, confirm beneficial owners, show the last 30 days transfer chain. If it's clean, you can vote in 10 minutes. The founder looked at the majority shareholder, then at Lin's chair, then at the folder on the table. For the first time, his expression shifted, not into fear, but calculation. He cleared his throat. 5 minutes for verification, he said. Lin stood immediately. Good, she replied, already moving for the door, eyes blazing. In the hallway, she pulled out her phone and typed fast. Find Yuri. Then another message, slower. Ngok is hiding something. Inside the room, the lawyer's phone buzzed. Yuri's follow-up. Receipt attached. Date mismatch. Chain of custody broken. The lawyer didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. If this becomes public, he said quietly, you're looking at more than civil exposure. That sentence landed like a weight. The founder's jaw tightened. He turned to the group. Adjourn, he said suddenly. Temporary. We reconvene after verification is complete. The majority shareholder shot up. You can't. I can, the founder snapped. And I won't sign my name onto a mess that can drag us into criminal territory. Silence. The vote didn't die, but it stopped. And that meant Lin's perfect clock had been cracked. Ngok exhaled so hard his vision blurred. He didn't look up. He didn't celebrate. He just sat there, alive. By evening, Yuri returned to the farm. The sky was soft, and the flower garden he planted looked almost unreal, like the day hadn't tried to swallow them. Tu Tieu was on the front steps, arms wrapped around herself, waiting with that stubborn, quiet hope only she had. When she saw him, she stood too fast. Uri. He didn't explain. He didn't boast. He just pulled her into a hug, tight and steady. I thought they'd take everything, Tu Tieu whispered into his shoulder. They tried, Uri said, voice tired, but not tonight. Tuong arrived a few minutes later, dropping into a chair like his bones were melted. Vote delayed, he said. Barely. Tu Tieu's eyes searched Yuri. And my mum? Yuri's expression softened. She's still at the hospital, he said. But she nodded, Tu Tieu. She agreed to a clean test, just once. But it was real. Tu Tieu's eyes filled instantly. She nodded? Yuri nodded back. We moved quietly, independent kit, witnessed, no Lin controlling the room. For a moment the farm went silent, the kind of silence that isn't empty. It's relief, finally finding a place to sit. Tu Tieu disappeared inside and returned with a plate of sticky rice cakes. Warm, ginger-scented, wrapped like someone had saved comfort on purpose. I kept these for you, she said softly. Yuri took one, broke it open, and steam rose up like a small apology from the world. He bit in, then let his shoulders drop for the first time all day. This tastes like a day that doesn't hate us, he murmured. Tu Tieu laughed through tears. That's the best compliment. Tuong leaned back exhausted and finally smiled. If you two open a bakery, I'm joining. They ate slowly, not because they were hungry, but because chewing made their bodies remember they weren't machines. Yuri glanced toward the flowers. Lin's power is loud when we're isolated, he said, but today it cracked. Tu Tieu looked at him, voice small. What if she comes harder next time? She will, Yuri said simply, but next time we don't chase feelings. We hold evidence. Tuong lifted his cup. To evidence. Tu Tieu lifted hers. To not being alone. Yuri raised his last. To staying alive, he said softly. And Tu Tieu understood he was repeating the promise that kept them standing. A breeze passed through the flower garden. For a few minutes, it almost felt normal. Yuri didn't turn his phone back on. Whatever Lin was planning could wait until tomorrow. Tonight he let Tu Tieu's shoulder rest against his, let the warm cakes and the quiet farm sounds stitch their nerves back together, just enough to face the next fight. Ngok finally breaks under the pressure and betrays Lin in the most dangerous way, by stealing a private lab receipt and evidence proving the DNA report wasn't issued by the hospital system. In a tense parking garage exchange, he hands the envelope to Yuri before Lin's men grab him and drag him back upstairs. Yuri sends the proof to his lawyer and Twong, who storms into the emergency board meeting with a formal objection, forcing proxy checks and verification. When the lawyer warns the vote could become criminally risky, the founder abruptly adjourns, delaying Lin's takeover plan. By night, Yuri returns to the farm and shares a rare calm moment with Tu Tieu and Twong. Over warm sticky rice cakes and the quiet flower garden, Yuri reveals Mrs. Lan secretly nodded yes to an independent witnessed DNA retest, giving Tu Tieu a fragile new hope, even as Lin prepares her next move.